Hi, Brian. Nice to have you again. Today it's going to be a discussion about Myanmar, what is happening in Myanmar, and maybe why don't you give us the context, historical context, and up to the what we call the constitutional coup of the beginning of the year. I think the purpose of this discussion is that is to debunk a little bit this portraying of the military as being the bad guys and Aung San Suu Kyi to be the good guys, democracy and freedom and so on. And there's no one actually trying to debunk this whole thing, just to give a more accurate image of what is actually happening in Myanmar. So could you give us maybe the background, maybe historical, and what is happening right now in Myanmar?
People are trying to depict this, especially the Western media, and of course the opposition leaders themselves are trying to depict this as if the military just suddenly seized power, that there was some sort of democracy happening, that the government that was ousted was democratically elected, and they're not really going into the details of what led up to that, why the military would have done that. We saw the Western media talk about things like, oh, they arrested Aung San Suu Kyi because she was using unauthorized radios or something. And as I think people who are following my work realize, that as you dig into who Aung San Suu Kyi was, who she was surrounded with, the nature of the opposition, or I should say her government once they got into power, and now they're the opposition. Once you start digging into their backgrounds, virtually every single one of them is tied directly to these foreign governments, the United States government through the National Endowment for Democracy or USAID, supposedly private corporate foundations like George Soros's Open Society. But as I've shown, there are documents that admit UK British government documents that admit the US government was working with Open Society. So they're not independent of each other, they're working together. And so her entire political party and the supposed civil society networks that support her party, this was all a creation of the US and also the British government. And there's also a role that Germany, Australia, and other Western allied governments have been playing. To call that a democratically elected government, a government that is the product of foreign intervention, is completely dishonest, completely inaccurate. It is the product of foreign interference. Democracy is a process of self-determination. Everything about Aung San Suu Kyi's government is literally being decided in foreign capitals. And we're probably going to get into her foreign advisors. She literally had foreigners surrounding her, around her constantly, just determining her policies for her. So there was no element of self-determination here at all. It was basically a modern day colonial administration that they installed into power. This is what the military removed from power.
Yes, remember there was this task force Asia Society meeting in 2009, and you had like very top people from the State Department in 2009, and in the task force there was a Sean Turnell, which is an Australian citizen, and that became actually later a personal advisor of Aung San Suu Kyi. Could you give us a little bit the background of this task force and what was the purpose? Because you see, I went through the paper, and there was a lot about talking, not so much about democracy. It was more about how are we going to liberalize Myanmar. When you talk about liberalizing, is how we can get our hands into Myanmar state-owned assets. How we can, just get into Myanmar and make it a hostage or maybe a US pawn. So can you give us a little bit more information about this paper, this task force?
So this was put out, I'm looking at it right now, it's actually 2010, put out by Asia Society, but it's called Asia Society, but it's basically all these Western interests talking about what they want to do with Asia.
It's the Ford Foundation, right? It's the Ford Foundation behind it, huh?
Actually, there's many